This episode of Legends, the series, is brought to you by these fine companies.
I think when I was about 10, my mom would drive us to, after Mass, 8:30 Mass, they would take my dad to San Fernando Dragster, and we'd all pile into the 52 Chevy. We would drive through two of the worst parts of the San Fernando Valley to get there with the windows down, no air conditioning, this is like 57, 89. And as we get close to the track, after driving through the ghetto, my mom would say, "Children, we're almost at the drag strip. Roll up the windows and lock the doors." Because that gangbanger, mentality, all the movies and everything. And I just wanted to get out of that car so bad because we'd come from church, ordinary, boring, Sunday, and we'd show up at the drag strip where there were all these mean-looking 55 Chevys and greaser guys and greaser girls. It was just a whole other world, And I wanted to stay so bad. When I was about 11, my mom let me get out with my dad. And I started gooping the Polaroid pictures for him. That was like the first thing. He'd be up on a ladder. I was 10 or 11. He'd hand down the Polaroid. Used to have to put the pink goop on him. I'd goop it for him. You wait 60 seconds and then put the goop on there. And I was right on the starting line. I mean, it was really spectacular, really fun. Then I got a job in the time slip booth when I was 11 because I was always hanging around, So I always thought, I didn't see it as a career because there really weren't many career opportunities in the late 50s, early 60s. I didn't really see it that way, but I used to take Hot Rod magazine and I would actually correct the page. When I saw a typo or something, I couldn't understand how anybody could make a typo in Hot Rod magazine or a mistake. I used to actually mark them up when I was probably 11 or 12 years old. I knew I wanted to be some kind of a sports reporter or a journalist, but I had no idea how to get there. I really didn't, even with the drag strip and all that. But I thought if I could find a role here, some role, I realized pretty quick I wasn't smart enough to be a crew chief, a tuner. I mean, I watched these people tearing motors down even then when I was a little kid. And I thought what they were doing was these young guys, 18, 19, 20 years old, was so far beyond any mechanical ability. I knew I was never going to make it as a mechanic, probably wasn't going to be a driver. This was a good niche for somebody that wanted to be involved and didn't really have the talent to do any of the normal things. So pretty much from that day, I think, when I first started going to the track with my parents. I remember there was a Iski Clown, was a Dick Guyette's car, was a dragster with a big chrome key in the back for a push bar. And like a little kid sees that. It was an orange dragster. That was the first dragster I ever saw up close, I think, when I was probably 9 or 10. And I thought, man, whatever that is, I just got to see this thing run, So pretty much from age 11 until I'm 68.
Drag racing is a family affair, a form of automotive togetherness.
How pure was drag racing in the 1960s?
It was about as pure as it gets, I think. Really, there wasn't any money to speak of. People were racing for trophies, for glory, and you didn't know. The way my folks looked at it, a lot of people, this is a fad, like hula hoops, they used to say. This is going to be gone. It's just a fad that's come in here and it's fine right now and it's probably going to go away. And that was kind of the prevailing opinion. So everybody was in it for the fun of it and the accomplishment. There was no money to be made really in it, I don't think, with a couple of exceptions, maybe Tommy Ivo and Garland's. But as recently as probably 63 or 64, there really wasn't any dough in it for anybody to not make it pure, you know what I mean? There just wasn't. It wasn't there. The opportunities weren't there. It was still pretty much doing it for love and for the accomplishment of it. And it was one of the only things a young guy with no money could do. If you weren't a jock, if you weren't a musician or something, it was one of the things you could do with virtually no money. Where we used to have people come to San Fernando in the morning. They would go to church. They would make a qualifying run or for their class or whatever it was. They'd go home and have breakfast or lunch with their significant other and come back to the track and run eliminations. I mean, that's about as low-key and pure as it gets. And if they won, they got maybe a $3 trophy. I was good at English. I was not good at math. I was not good at science. I pretty much wasn't good at anything except PE and English at school. And I was never the smartest kid in the class or even close, but on the way to school, on the day a composition was due, I could write the composition in the car, riding to school with my mom or walking, just whatever it was, and get a B or a C, you know what I mean, without even thinking about it. So I always had that, and I used to love the LA sports pages. Jim Murray was the columnist. I would listen with my transistor radio at night sometimes under my pillow, and then I would make notes, and the next day I would, without looking at the newspaper that came, my dad always got 2 newspapers at the house, I would write a story about the Dodgers baseball game the night before and then see how it compared. So I thought that's my route, you know. So I didn't really have any avenue there, and I always wanted to write the stories. My dad was the track reporter kind of by default because he was the only guy on the crew who could type in San Fernando. There were 11 people on the crew, including the security guard who doubled as a time slip hand-router guy. My dad could type, so they moved him up from a pit gate. He didn't know anything about drag racing or cars, but they moved him up from a pit gate around 1961 because he could type. So he started doing the results and the stories and shooting Polaroids. So I was right with him, and I was, you know, I could write. So I kept bugging him, Dad, can I write a story? And it's like, he said, Dad, just wait your time. You're 11 years old, you're 12 years old, you're 13. So when I was 14, on Father's Day, in June of probably 64, I said, Dad, Mom wants to go out and have dinner. You could never do anything on Sunday night because he'd be writing the story pretty much all night for 2 or 3 different trade papers. So I said, you can go out. I'll write your story longhand tonight because I didn't know how to type. And then you can go out with Mom, and then you just type it up when you come home. So I thought, I'll spend an hour or 2 on this story, my first story. Well, they came home from dinner at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I was still handwriting. He got up the next morning at 4 or 5 before he went to work. I was still writing. He goes, I have to type this up. I have to go to the special delivery. So he typed up my story from June of 64 on Father's Day and said, my son did this for me as a gift. It wasn't a great story, but it was my first byline. And then he told me, he goes, I'll tell you 2 things. You can do this. You have the ability to do this at 14, and I'm never going to do this again. I said, why not? He goes, it's too much trouble to retype this. If you learn how to type, you can start helping me do this. So that ruined my summer when I was 14, going to summer school at the local high school so I could learn to type. And that really changed my life. If I hadn't taken that class, because then he said, okay, you can start writing. So by the time I was 15, I was doing the stories every week for Drag News, then Drag Sport Illustrated, and I thought you had, and Drag World, and I thought you had to do a different story for each one. So I typed 3 different stories. I was up always all Sunday night trying to get it perfect because it had to go in the special delivery pouch at 6 in the morning from the Van Nuys post office to get to Drag News, to get to all the trade papers. So that was a deadline. I always tell people, you know, you learn really early about real deadlines. That was a real hard deadline. At 6 o'clock in the morning, that had to go with, I never slept on Sunday nights. And then as I got my driver's license, I'd take Mondays off school. I had terrible grades because I was wiped out on Monday. And I'd say to my folks, okay, going to school. And I'd go to the beach or someplace and sleep in my car, you know, just because I wanted to do this so bad. And you know, when you see your byline, I don't know if it was pride or what it was. There was something about the byline in print that appealed to me. And I think all of us journalists have that in common, photographers. There's something about that makes you proud or happy or something. So I like that rush, you know, not that I was terrible. I really was pretty terrible when I was 14, 15. But they say you have to be bad somewhere, and it was a great opportunity, write 3 stories every Sunday night, 3 different stories about the same race. You know, you get better, you have to, because, you know, so I love that. And I'm a curious person, and it always bothered me to read a story. The guy broke, and he didn't come back in the next round. Well, what did he break? You know, what happened? Don't say he broke. Take a minute. I wondered why the reporters didn't track the person down and say what broke. So my curiosity was unquenchable. And now I had a reason. To this day, if I don't have a press pass covering an event, I try not to bother people. But if you have a reason to ask them, what a great what a great pass that is to walk up to. I'd walk up to guys with the whole bottom end would be on the starting line with no consideration that was the mortgage payment maybe, or maybe they're going to get divorced now because they blew the motor on the starting line. I'd run up with my clipboard to Ed Pink or whoever was there and say, what happened? And almost always they knew right there whether the drive shaft broke in the fuel pump. They pretty much knew right then what had gone wrong, and they'd look at you like, why are you bothering me? But I was such a young, innocent kid. I think everybody was kind to me. I told Ed Pink once, if you had growled at me or something one time, I probably would have run away crying and I never would have had this for a career. But I was curious, and I thought the reader, if I'm curious, the reader, especially a mechanically oriented reader, is going to want to know what broke. So it gave me a reason, it justified my curiosity to go ask him what happened. And I tried to have that as best I could in every story. And my dad always taught me, a sponsor can make the difference in a little guy racer, just a set of spark plugs or oil, and him continuing or not. My dad always tried to list any sponsor. He'd ask the racer, even a little guy that won sea gas or something one week, does anybody help you? Can I plug you? And I followed that too when I was young. If somebody I tried to help the racers out as much as I could, at least so their sponsor would see their name in the paper, something like that. Trying to make it good for everybody,
In 1965, Vietnam seemed like just another foreign war, but it wasn't. It was different in many ways, and so were those who did the fighting. In World War II, the average age of the combat soldier was 26. In Vietnam, he was 19. In Vietnam, he was 19. In Vietnam, he was 19. 19.
The heaviest fighting of the past 2 weeks continued today, 25 miles northwest of Saigon.
I wasn't really sure what was going on.
19.
I wasn't really sure what was going on.
In Vietnam, the combat soldier typically served a 12-month tour of duty, but was exposed to hostile fire almost every day.
In 1969, you were drafted into the U.S. Army in Vietnam. Tell me how your drag racing background helped you.
Might have saved my life, Right in the Lion story. And then I got drafted at 19, and it screwed all that up because I was on a path to go maybe to Peterson someday, to hot rod or car craft, And instead, I got drafted and blown completely out of that, for 19 months. And I was really fortunate because, for no obvious reason, there were 180 guys in my training company at Fort Ord, and probably 160 of them literally were sent to artillery and infantry training. This is 1969. They were killing 300 GIs a week. So there was a huge demand for replacements. So they sent me to the military police academy for no reason. There was no obvious reason. I mean, you had to be 6 feet tall and you had to, have a certain intelligence level. But I think it was just because the military was so inefficient at placing people, they made me a cop. So I went to the military police academy, which was fine because we all figured we were headed to Vietnam. The first day I was in country, I was at my company C, 716th MP Battalion in Saigon. I was standing there not knowing what to expect. I'd been in the country a couple of days, and I was in line with a few guys waiting to process in. And every sergeant I'd ever dealt with up to that point had been in training, and they were all jerks. I never saw a sergeant who was friendly to a recruit or even an MP school. It was really harsh, pretty intense training, and I never saw a sergeant that I liked. So I'm standing in line there with 4 or 5 other scared kids. You're 19, 20 years old, and this guy's barking out orders kind of to everybody. Get in line here, we're going to process you in. And first thing he said after that was, any drag racers in line? And I was like, yes, Sergeant. Where are you from? Southern California? Yeah, where did you race? Well, I raced a little bit at San Fernando, but I was mostly a rider. He goes, where else? I go, Lions. He goes, did I read your column when you left, when you got drafted? Didn't I read in Drag News where you got drafted? Are you the guy that wrote that column? He goes, I saw that when I was home on leave. We're 8,000 miles from home or whatever. whatever, scared out of my pants. You know, it's dark, it's night, you know, in Vietnam, and this guy was a sergeant being nice to me, and he said that when they needed a company clerk replacement, instead of fighting with giant guys that were twice my size in bars, he kept saying, you should be the company clerk, and this guy's going to be leaving in a couple months, and I put you in with the first sergeant, the company commander, the captain. I said, this guy can write stories, he'd be great. He can do all this typing and filing and stuff. So this guy looked out for me. He was my partner when he was my patrol partner. He'd had a tour before, so he was very experienced. He protected me in a little bit of time I was out on the street as a cop. And then, sure enough, when the job opened up, because of his recommendation, they gave me a test, and I could type 60, 65 words a minute on a manual typewriter with a thing go ding, 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 you know. I got the job, which was a wonderful deal, because then I was further protected from harm. You know, I didn't have to worry so much about the Viet Cong and all, because I was in Saigon at that point, and then I didn't have to worry about the Americans killing me or beating me up at a bar, because I got to be the company clerk. So the fact that I took that typing lesson and drag racing, those two things came together certainly to make my life easier if it didn't save my life. I was there 19 months. I was in Vietnam 14 months in 1 week, and probably had one of the better experiences of somebody that got drafted and had to be there. It was no picnic.
People will never realize how much Vietnam affected drag racing.
Well, I was there in Vietnam for the time I was there for 14 months and 1 week. The guys would have girls on their locker like you'd see from World War II, whatever, you know, Playboy centerfolds, or they'd have cars or both. So there were, I'd say probably half the people in my company had some kind of a muscle car or a 55 Chevy or even a Model A or something on their locker. So they were taking everybody by 69. Everybody that hadn't continuously been to college and carried 12 units from high school, you were eligible. They started taking married guys. You know, they really got bad towards the end before the lottery came in. So they took 2.5 million people to Vietnam. Almost all of them were like me. They were 18, 19, 20 years old. So there's 2.5 million blue collar people, mostly because we weren't in college. So that's where the gearheads were. You know, you were racing or whatever. Most of us were not going to college. And then for every person in a combat zone, at least then, they said there was at least 2 support personnel somewhere. So if you took 2.5 million actual active duty people through the whole course of the war, 10 years, and then you took 5 million support people, that's 7.5 million people, most of them drafted. So you take 7.5 million people out of a blue collar population. That was the drag racing and motorsports population. So it decimated. I saw that happening when the crowd started to thin out a little bit before I went 69. And even though the muscle car thing was in full swing, the entries started falling off. So even if you came back alive, not maimed or anything, everyone was in a different place when they came back. So instead of following, like my journalism career was interrupted, so were all these gearheads. And they were all single for the most part. They all had jobs. It was post-World War II economy. And everybody was buying new muscle cars. I bought my new Roadrunner for $2,900. You know, everybody was able to do that. And when you came back, it interrupted your life, and you wanted to get married, maybe, or settle down, or have a girlfriend. You hadn't had a girlfriend for a year or two. So it changed the nature of it, and most of those people I maintained never got back in their swing. Like I was trying to race a car and stuff. When you got after this experience like that, you just wanted it to be quiet and safe. And it probably took me out of it for 3 years. As hardcore as I was into this stuff, I pretty much have a 3-year black hole there before I came back to it. So I think that affected most people who weren't in the military at that time overlooked that. You can talk about any number of things, insurance, the muscle car stuff changing, but I think when you take that big of a chunk out of the blue collar young American male, that had a hell of a lot to do with changing the interest. And of course, a lot of things changed from 69 when I went into 71. But when I got out in 71 and went to Sanford, went to the local tracks, the staging lanes weren't the same. There were just a lot of people missing, and I think most of them didn't come back. You know, it took a huge chunk out of it. That was a big factor in what changed there. back out, CJ Hart gave me my job back at Lions. Life's good, you know. About 4 weeks later, 5, 6 weeks later, he gets in a fight with the Lions board of directors, and he says, I'm quitting. I gave him my notice. So everybody on the crew at Lions, which was the premier drag strip in the country, no matter what anybody tells you, we all said, we're going to leave with you. So CJ Hart, his wife, and his 2 kids all worked there. And then there was a pretty good sized crew. And everybody said, we're going to leave here in support of you. So when the time came to leave, it was CJ Hart, his wife, his daughter Joni, his son, who was the announcer, Jerry, and me. Nobody else. We go walking out the door, look behind us, there's nobody else. I was the only one that actually followed through with it. Everybody else hung around and took their chances with Steve Evans, who was coming in. So I was out of it. I figured that was the end of it. It was 1971, and I was already done. You know, I figured that's the end of it. So where it came back, I'm sorry, in 71, yeah, where it came back to me was about 2 years later, CJ Hart called me up and said, I need a new PR guy at Orange County Raceway. I'm living in Maryland, miserable at a speed shop, making very little money. It's cold, you know, it's Maryland. I'm used to Southern California. Trying to figure out how I could get back here, you know. Giving up on drag racing journalism entirely. That was the farthest thing from my mind. I was 22. I was done. He called me up. I had no idea what a PR guy did. He said, the only catch is you have to be here by Thursday because we have to do promotion. You have to write radio spots, which I'd never done either. He goes, you have to be here by Thursday. If you can get across country by Thursday, you've got the job. This was Friday or Saturday. So I went home and told my girlfriend, I'm going. I had a short bed, narrow bed, lowered 73 Chevy pickup, black. I had a tarp across the back, and everything I could fit under that tarp is everything I took with me. Everything else I left in my girlfriend's apartment, booked it for the coast, and Thursday all of a sudden I had this wonderful job with an office in the tower of Orange County. And that tower, I mean, things turned around like unbelievable, you know. And learning on the job, he was very patient. I wrote all the radio ads, the TV ads, and it was back writing stories for drag news again from the bracket races or whatever they had, you know. So I did that for 2 years, working for Jim Tice at AHRA, and that was a huge thing for me. It brought me contact with, I was the guy who had to say yes or no to passes, so the Peterson people would call for passes or whatever, you know, press passes, credentials, all these people I'd read about and read their stories when I was a kid. It forced them to interact with me and kind of know who I was. That was a huge thing for me, making those network connections, you know. That was a real big deal. And things started getting a little shaky in Orange County. Checks were bouncing. When Larry Huff had it, Tice had already bailed, had lost his ass, basically. So Larry Huff came in and tried to take it over. He was a racer. He wasn't a track operator. It's kind of a part-time thing for him. It got to the point where checks were bouncing. Mine hadn't bounced yet, and I could kind of see what was coming. So I went to Drag News one day, and I said, you know, I'm going to be looking for a job. And Doris Herbert said, well, my young husband here has been doing it, but we'd like to get somebody with your experience. So I took a pay cut from $200 a week to $120 a week in 75 to become the editor of Drag News. And I had a journalism class at night. It was a GI Bill thing. To supplement my income, I would announce at tracks like bracket races. And I also had two classes on the GI Bill. I didn't really care about going to college. I just wanted to get the money to live. So one of the classes I took was a journalism class with a guy who was a PR guy. He never graduated from college, but he was a real PR guy. So I came to one day and I said, you know, I got this job offer, but I'm going to take this huge pay cut from $200 a week to $120. And there's going to be a lot of work. It's a one-man staff. There's only basically me. And I have to put out a paper every week. He goes, I said, I'm thinking, you know, I don't know. And he goes, you know what, you should do that. He said, because the chance to be an editor may never come again, and you will learn how to be a better journalist if you're the editor. He goes, I'll tell you what, I'll let you finish the course if you send me your editorial. He says, do you have an editorial? I go, yeah, every week I'll have to write an editorial. He goes, send me your editorial every week, and when the paper comes out, mail it to me, and I'll grade you. I'll grade you on your editorial, and that'll be your class just between us. So the whole rest of that semester, I kept getting the GI Bill money, and he would grade me every week on my editorial. And it was really true. I'd never had that experience. So being a one-man, print publisher guy, the publisher was there, Doris Herbert, the owner. She would typeset whatever I wrote on old type machines. But I had to do either write or rewrite every word in a paper that was sometimes 48 pages, every single thing. Then that's when I realized, here I was writing these careful stories with onion skin and carbon paper when I was a kid for three different stories for 3 different magazines, thinking it had to be perfect because that's the way my dad did it. I get there and I would get literally, one guy would send me stories on the back of shopping bags. He'd send his film on a little pouch for the airlines so we could pick up the film on Sunday night or Monday morning, wherever they were, and he would write me handwritten terrible stories on brown paper bags or whatever he had to work with, paper plates, whatever he had to write at the track. And I'd have to, of course, rewrite all their stuff. So that was a crash course, from Monday morning till Tuesday morning. And Tuesday it went to the press, and it had to go to the press at 10 in the morning. That trained me. That training, the guy was right, my teacher. There was no better education than that, to throw yourself in. And I was very controversial. The paper had a controversial history. So it wasn't that Dave Wallace wanted to be controversial. Drag News's niche was to be honest and open and pull no punches. So it made me probably Wally's number one enemy. It was a very contentious thing to be the editor of Drag News because that's what the Drag News readers expected. They knew what they'd get from the trade papers or National Dragster. It was a house organ. You didn't expect controversy there. Hot Rod was Peterson, which was Wally Parks. He was the first editor of Hot Rod. Hot Rod Carcraft. They did a little bit of that, but not hardcore, So, but I had great luck. I remember, I called Perome when Perome started complaining about Winston. He didn't want to run IHRA because Winston was in there first before they were in IHRA. He didn't want to run IHRA. And the reason he gave was, I don't want anybody handing cigarettes out to my daughter at the racetrack, my little girl. And so I quoted him in an interview with the Snake. He was driver of the year. How come you didn't run IHRA? You won the AHRA championship. You won the NHRA championship. You were unbeatable in match racing, independent races. Why not IHRA? He tells me about the cigarette thing. So right away, I've got R.J. Reynolds screaming at my boss. I've got the Army was mad because the Army sponsored him. They didn't want him to be controversial. Everybody, Wally was crazy because we were talking about negative stuff and they were getting Winston into their pocket. It was like that all the time. But I never had anybody say, I'm not going to talk to you. It was for whatever reason. I think if you treat them with respect and you're honest, then people will respond. I think any journalist will find that. If you have your integrity with you, they might not like something you write, but if you quote them accurately and you're honest, then the next time you come back, they will have forgotten how pissed off they were when you lost their Winston spot. But that's when things changed. Was when Winston came in. That was the biggest change I saw I've seen in my career, because they train people in how they train the racers and how to be more professional in interviews, that kind of thing. It was a Dozier Mobley and Jeff Bird, those guys came in 73, right in there, 74. And I was just leaving Orange County and then going to the magazines. They really cleaned things up. They would give, a lot of people don't know this, but they'd give any track operator all the red and white paint you wanted. You didn't have to put Winston on anything, but they knew that if you were painting it red and white, that association would be made. So every podunk track could order as much red and white paint as you wanted to paint your house or whatever. They would send it all, didn't ask for anything except that you made your place red and white. So you look at all that marketing kind of things that they were tying together, we were really naive. About what was coming, about that giant push from a huge tobacco company. And they had just been kicked off the TV, I think. They couldn't advertise, so they went into rodeo and motorsports and all these little tiny sports, relatively small sports, where they could control the message. And everything was RJ this and RJ that, and everybody was smoking at all the banquets, and they loved having the racers smoking cigarettes during an interview. They encouraged that, so that again the kids would see their heroes smoking cigarettes. That was a big deal for drag racing. I think it changed the sport. And that's not an original thought. A lot of people have. Bob Post, who wrote High Performance, the Bible of drag racing history, he brings that out in his book, how he watched that change. And he'd been doing it since the early 50s, from the beginning of drag racing. He also keyed on that as the biggest change we saw in professionalism. All of a sudden there was points. Cheryl Greer brings himself up for almost no money just to be the Winston World Champion and hopefully get a sponsor the next year. All that changed immensely. And then it gave the sanctioning bodies a huge power, because if you didn't play ball with them, you weren't going to get any TV, which was brand new, really. you weren't going to get any much press. You had to play ball. That was the beginning of the sanctioning bodies, I think, controlling the racers to the point where it is today.
You were blessed to be able to watch the advent of drag racing journalism back in the printed days, but you were also around to watch it transform into the internet era. How did you react to this new modern way of drag racing journalism?
The biggest thing that changed in my career was television. We were always the print guys, you know, were it. Peterson Publishing owned it, controlled everything. If you think about it, they had Hot Rod, Carcraft, Motor Trend, they had everything except drag news. They had ultimate power. It would be like today if you owned the internet, cable TV, broadcast TV, radio, podcasts, print. That's the kind of power that Peterson had. And what I noticed was when they started coming in, when Winston came in, they wanted TV.
Diamond P Sports presents championship drag racing from the National Hot Rod Association, the Summer National. Brought to you by Anheuser-Busch St. Louis, brewers of world-renowned Budweiser. When do you say Budweiser? And by English Leather Toiletries for Men. Ask for English Leather at fine toiletry counters everywhere. And by Fram, makers of oil, air, and fuel filters, windshield wipers, and Autolite spark plugs and tune-up kits.
They didn't want people just to see it drag news or hot rod. They wanted the massive world audience. That was a way for Winston to get on TV legally. There's the Winston banners. You know, at that time you could still do that, but you could not buy an ad anymore on TV for cigarettes. So they were in print, they were in all this. We started getting moved back off the starting line was the first thing I noticed. We know there's been television since the 60s, some ABC, Wild World of Sports, this and that. But as far as regular coverage where it might make the news or something like that, they started moving the video cameras. The TV cameras had the best spot in the starting line, and they started treating the print people, NHRA in particular, like second-class citizens. And that was as early as, you know, the mid-70s, what we're talking about when Winston came in, I'd say. So the big change was television cameras. And then the internet came later, but it was almost subtle because TV had changed things so dramatically. They could have this spot, they could have that spot. You had to move. Don't get in the way of a TV guy. All of a sudden, people have been doing this all these years. So print took a second, you know, it became a kind of a second-class citizen. And the way we saw it was you'd go to get your tickets, you'd have to almost beg, like NHRA for starting line access. But anybody with a video camera of any kind at that time, because video cameras hadn't really gotten popular, was allowed to go out there. If you were doing television, you know, any kind of television, local news, whatever, they'd do anything for you. And the print kept getting moved down. Because the internet was so many different things, you know, it was bigger than that, because you didn't just have 3 broadcast networks or whatever. All of a sudden you had every not podcast then, but every website, anything anybody wanted, any, you know, blog thing, everybody wanted to pass to the races. So it was definitely a change I didn't see coming as fast as it came. I was warned by it by certain people, and I didn't see it coming. When Cole Coots started Nitronic Research, that really opened my eyes, because they had header flames, a section where you could call in and, you know, you could complain, flame each other. And that was, what, 20 years ago, maybe, something like that. Here's this whole new thing, and at the time it was hard to even get online. You know, you had to kind of know what you were doing to get online and stuff. And I thought, well, this is never going to really, you know, take over print or television, surely, because it's too difficult. How many people have a computer? How many people have a modem? It was, you know, I can remember the time when modems were introduced, you know, in my day. So the internet effect on everything I underestimated it for the longest time, and no, I wasn't down on it or anything like that, except that it didn't pay. If somebody wanted something for the internet, even to this day, you know, what they'll pay for a post is nothing like a story. And the problem with that today, I welcome all this. The more, you know, all of it's great. Whatever people do, you can't control it, obviously. Just go with the flow. The difference is, the attitude seems to be now, you have a lot of middle managers at publishing companies. They're digitally oriented. They're all trying to, you know, to make their digital side look good, even if it's just to resell the company. You don't want to say we're an old dinosaur print company, even if we are. You want to say we're a digital content company, and that's good pizzazz for Wall Street, for investors, right? But the real problem for me is you'll have a middle manager who's in his 30s or 40s, and his attitude is, whether it's accurate or not, is we don't have to pay Dave Wallace to research a story and spend all the time and make it perfect, because they're just people are going to read it on their phone, they're going to hit delete, and that's going to be the end of it. So whether that's valid or not, they'll pay $17 for a story that I would have gotten $1,700 for before, because they want 1,000 words and 12 photos. And you try to explain to them why a Dave Wallace or a Bobby Bennett or a Cole Kuntz or whoever is worth it, because he's going to research a story. We can just change it if it's wrong. We'll just change it. It's no big deal. It doesn't have to be right. We'll get a letter, an email, we'll change it. Nobody will ever know the mistake was made. Where my mistakes are, they might as well be written in stone. I'm stuck with them forever. So that responsibility to get it right, because you know that printed thing is going to be around forever, as long as paper exists, that's been removed in favor of just pay him $17, he gets a pass to the races, and we'll fix it if it's wrong. Well, that kills me. You know, that is the opposite of what I've tried to do my whole life. If I had to spend 20 hours researching something to try to get it right, not that I haven't made more mistakes than anybody, but I'll spend the time. Where somebody else might just bang that out, somebody who's not a professional journalist or is a modern age journalist, where they'll just fix it. They'll get 10 letters and they'll change everything back, and that bothers. That's always, it's like, that's not fair. I'm stuck with my mistakes, you know. So today, of course, it's a whole different world. I still see a value in print and the layouts and the fact that you have to be careful like that. That you're not getting fake news. If you have a magazine where you trust the magazine, it's already vetted. Somebody has vetted that, as opposed to maybe some blog post or something that isn't. So yeah, you can get information and you can fill your 2 or 3 hours a day for free with racing news, but it might be fake news, it might be somebody's opinion news, it might not be accurate. If you buy a magazine for $8, it better be good, or you're going to lose that sale. So I see that as an advantage, but there's few. Hot Rod Deluxe is a rare exception where it makes money on the newsstand with very little advertising. People must value that. Why else would you spend $8 when you could have whatever you wanted for free? And then, of course, in the internet world, there's a huge range of quality. Competition Plus is respected. I think Competition Plus treats all these things like a print publication does. Competition Plus looks at it real seriously. Maybe the next guy doesn't, or the competition doesn't. You have people with motorsports websites or let's say digital publishing companies. Maybe they know about Mustangs or they know about Camaros, but they're doing Camaros, Mustangs, tractor pulls, drag racing, oval track racing. They have no expertise and no background, and maybe they have some young and experienced person doing that because they're cheap and just waiting for somebody to correct it, or they'll just take it down. So you have a huge range of information from the best, vetted and really into it on the web, maybe like Competition Plus, all the way down to some other people we could name, where I read it and I go, how did this even get online? You know, how did anybody let this go? And then you realize there's nobody there that knows any better, because that tribal knowledge that we used to have passed down from publishers and editors to the next generation, it's really fragmented now. The gatekeepers are anybody, where the gatekeepers used to be a few people at Peterson, Drag News, Hot Drag World, Drag Sport Illustrated. There were only a few gatekeepers, and they knew the difference. Now you've got anybody basically with a phone can be a publisher. So how does the average person know what's good, what's wrong? You know what I mean? That bothers me, because they may think it's all the same. Why pay $8 for a print magazine? But I always say to people, if you let your subscription expire, or you don't go buy your favorite print magazine and it goes away, you're not going to ever see another one. The ones that are left, that are successful, Muscle Car Review, Hot Rod Deluxe, there's very few really that make money on their own. When those are gone, you can't sell a magazine idea anymore to a publishing company. If it's digital, they'll talk to you. If you can do a video, they'll talk to you. But nobody wants to get into print, even though the Enthusiast Network just sold their video division, as you know, to Discovery Channel. In the due diligence and in the press release, it's mentioned in there that print still accounts for 75% of the Enthusiast Network's revenue. Yet, the print's mentioned on the bottom of page 2 of the press release, and they were trying to sell they sold roadkill to Discovery, and that's where the attention is. Even though print still makes the money, it's now 75%, where it was 100% not that long ago, and that will continue to decline. But my feeling is there's still value there in a print publication. They can still make money done correctly, but it's a lot harder to print a magazine, store it, bind it, ship it by train and truck, and get it on a newsstand that maybe is shrinking or going away, than it is to have a hot digital property where you'll hit a home run like Roadkill did for the Enthusiast Network. I love that show. I'm there with all the 12-year-old boys, loving that thing. You know, I see it's free, it's entertaining, it's great, but I also think there's room for print. If you're looking for solid, vetted news and it's a quality publication, you'll get reliable information there. So that to me is still an advantage, and I hope there's some print left, you know, in my life, because I don't know what I'll do if it goes away. I can't live on $17 blog posts. Those of us that worked in print are lucky, because we will be remembered for better or worse. I figure somebody somewhere will read your story. We're lucky that way, that we have some kind of legacy, you know. And I've seen most people over the years, they sell out. They either get lazy or they sell out at some point. So my feeling is I'd like to be remembered as somebody that tried to get it right, even though I've probably made more mistakes than anybody ever. Remembered as somebody that made honest mistakes only, and tried to treat everybody, give them the best, put the best light on everybody. Although if there's a controversy or somebody needs to be criticized, I look at it as a fan. I want to be remembered as an advocate for the average fan, because I'm not a racer. I mostly represent the fan. I like to sit in the stands and talk to people, and that's the attitude I have. Is I'd like to be remembered as somebody that looked out for that little guy, the guy in the stands, not the big sponsor, not the advertiser, not the publishing company, but how I want to make sure that guy gets the truth to the best of my ability. So if I'm remembered as somebody that had some integrity and always tried to do the right thing and made honest mistakes, not mistakes because somebody bribed me or tainted me somehow, that would be great. I mean, you're dead. So, you know, a lot of people would say, hey, it doesn't matter, you're dead. Well, it matters to me because my dad's reputation is at stake too here. He did this before I did, and he was a straight shooter. My dad was like, he used to tell me, you know, if you do the wrong thing, everybody knows where to find you on Sunday afternoon. If you diss somebody unjustifiably, they know where to find you on Sunday afternoon. They can just drive out here to the track and beat the crap out of you. You know what I mean? So he always had that idea that as long as you were honest and you had your integrity, you could stand up to that kind of thing. So don't ever let that go. So I feel like I also have my family's reputation at stake here too. You know.